Now let's move over to New Mexico and take a look at the Chicano movement that was occurring there. One of the main issues in New Mexico has been land, and we talked about this before, particularly in northern New Mexico. A lot of native New Mexicans were losing their land as more and more Anglo-Americans moved into the state. And so that had been a huge issue. We talked about how communal lands were lost, right? Those are lands that were owned by the community during the Spanish and later Mexican period. And eventually these lands were lost because the community wasn't able to prove that they had title to those lands, and they were sold off to Anglo-Americans. Some of them became part of state lands or public lands, and so this becomes a major issue during this time as poverty is increasing in northern New Mexico. Many individuals would have to sell their lands because in order to get public assistance, you could not own land. And so you have individuals who are not able to continue to survive without having public assistance, and so they were forced to sell their lands. And so the issue got pretty bad. Eventually, you would see a resistance movement taking place there in northern New Mexico, and the resistance movement is all about trying to reclaim these lands that were lost, these communal lands and private land grants that were lost over the last 100 years. One of the leaders in this resistance movement was Reyes Lopez Tijerina. Tijerina had originally moved to New Mexico from Texas. He was a preacher. He moved to northern New Mexico eventually and became aware of this issue and started to work with the families who had claimed these land grants. For a period of time, Tijerina had left northern New Mexico and actually moved to Mexico, where he studied up on the history of these land grants. He studied Spanish law, Mexican law, and gained a large knowledge base of the rights that were related to these land grants. After being deported from Mexico, Tijerina moved back to northern New Mexico and began to organize this resistance movement in order to get these lands back from Anglo-Americans and the state. Tijerina helped to establish Alianza Federal de Mercedes, and this organization was focused on regaining those millions of acres that were lost from the land grants that were owned during the Mexican and Spanish period. The problem was, it was going to take a lot of money to bring the state and these private landowners, these Anglo landowners, to court, right? And Alianza did not have the money to really pursue those court cases. So they had to come up with a plan in order to bring this issue of the land grants into the courts. And the way that they were going to do this was to occupy state lands and then get arrested, and that would force the issue to be heard in the local court system. Okay, and so that's exactly what they did. And so Tijerina and Alianza would occupy lands in the Kit Carson National Forest, particularly an area called the Echo Amphitheater. And so they occupied that land, and they claimed that they were establishing a new republic there on this land called the Republic of Joaquin, after the San Joaquin land grant that used to occupy that area. Okay, so basically this area was a part of a former land grant, a communal land grant called the San Joaquin land grant. Okay, but it had been acquired by the state of New Mexico and made into a national forest, and so that's why Tijerina and Alianza had taken over this land and established this new republic there, right? With the plan that they were going to get arrested. Okay, and eventually park rangers did come and try to arrest them, but Alianza ended up arresting the park rangers, right? They arrested the park rangers because they had created this new republic there in the area of the Echo Amphitheater. All right, so they arrested these park rangers and they tried them for trespassing, and they eventually let them go. But this was a whole incident, right? I mean, imagine taking over public lands and then arresting park rangers who were coming to stop you. Okay, so that was a big move there by Alianza. After this action, there were a number of other militant tactics that were used in New Mexico. It's not known whether Alianza actually played a role in these, but there were individuals who were going around and cutting down fences. This is similar to what happened decades before with Las Gorras Blancas, but now you have individuals who are cutting down fences. They're killing the animals that are owned by Anglo-Americans on these lands, and they're burning down homes, and ultimately you're you're going to see a lot of Anglo-Americans moving out of the area in northern New Mexico because of these more militant tactics that are being used. So over time, Alianza is becoming more and more popular in New Mexico. They had about 20,000 members, and they were having mass meetings and drawing a lot of attention. Eventually, the local police forces cracked down on them. They banned their meetings and arrested several members of Alianza. Now, Alianza would react to this. They wouldn't just take this lying down by conducting a raid on a courthouse in Tierra Amarilla. Now, the purpose of conducting this raid on the courthouse is to try to get their members released from jail. Right? They were going to raid the courthouse and force them to release their members. So that was one of the points of having this raid. But there was also another point of making a citizen's arrest on the district attorney, Alfonso Sanchez. Right? Sanchez wasn't actually there at the courthouse at that time, so that part failed. Eventually, there would be a firefight or a shootout that would take place at the courthouse. A few individuals would be killed, and a couple would be taken hostage by Alianza, who escaped from the courthouse and went into the mountains to hide. Right, so they actually took hostages. Went to the mountains, and there's this massive manhunt that takes place in New Mexico looking for them. Eventually, they give themselves up and they'll be arrested. Tijerina is one of the individuals who gets arrested for this, and they'll be put on trial. Tijerina will defend himself. He gets off some of his charges, but eventually is convicted on other charges stemming from the amphitheater incident, and he gets a couple of years in jail. And he eventually will be released from jail under the conditions that he will not associate with anyone from Alianza anymore. Right? They're trying to break up the whole movement. And he does, and ultimately he doesn't fade away from the spotlight exactly, but Alianza starts to break down during this time when Tijerina, its main leader, is in jail, right? And he can't associate with them afterwards. They'd eventually reorganize under a different name afterwards, and Tijerina would continue to fight as part of the larger Chicano movement. He would be involved in the Poor People's March on Washington, D.C. As a prominent Mexican-American leader. And so ultimately, Alianza is setting a huge precedent for militant actions and the militant aspect of the Chicano movement.